Imagine someone collapses on a busy street. Dozens of people walk past. Nobody stops. Nobody calls for help. And somehow, you watch it happen too. That moment, that paralysis, has a name. And the real reason it happens has nothing to do with cruelty, indifference, or selfishness. It goes back much further than that. It goes back to the survival logic baked into your brain before civilization ever existed. This is the bystander effect. And once you understand what is actually happening inside you when it kicks in, you will never see a crowd the same way again. In 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment building in New York City. She screamed. She cried out for help, and according to early reports, 38 neighbors witnessed it. Not one of them called the police. Not one of them intervened. Social psychologists John Darley and Latané asked the same question. But instead of assuming people were simply cold-hearted, they asked something more precise. What if the presence of other people was itself the problem? What if the crowd was not helping, but actively preventing help? So they ran an experiment. They had participants sit alone in a room and listen through an intercom to what sounded like another participant having a seizure. When the subject believed they were the only one who could hear it, 85% of them left to get help within 60 seconds. Then Darley and Latané changed one variable. They told participants that 5 other people were also listening. The rate of intervention dropped to just 31%. Same emergency, same sounds, radically different response. The only thing that changed was how many people were there. That is the bystander effect in its purest form, and your brain is not broken for falling into it. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Think about your ancestors, not your great-grandparents, not even ancient Rome. Go back 150,000 years. Your species lived in small bands of 20 to 150 people. Every individual in that group knew every other individual. When something went wrong, a predator, an injury, a fire, you acted fast because you knew whose responsibility it was. There was no ambiguity. No stranger standing 2 feet away whose job it might be. The group was small enough that diffusion of responsibility was not even possible. Now drop one of those ancestors into a city of 8 million people surrounded by strangers. The brain does not rewire itself in 3 generations. It is still running the same ancient code. And in a crowd of strangers, that code produces a glitch. You look around, other people seem calm. You conclude that maybe this is not actually an emergency, or you think someone else must already be handling it. You feel less personally responsible because the responsibility seems shared across so many people. That is not weakness. That is a mismatch, a survival program running in an environment it was never designed for. Psychologists call this 2 things. The first is pluralistic ignorance. You look at the crowd, see that no one is reacting, and take that collective stillness as a signal that everything is fine. But here is the twist. Everyone else is doing exactly the same thing. Every person in that crowd is watching every other person and reading their calm as information. The whole group is misleading itself simultaneously. You are not reading reality. You are reading each other's uncertainty and calling it certainty. The second is diffusion of responsibility. The more people present, the smaller your personal sense of obligation becomes. If you are the only one there, the weight of the situation falls entirely on you. That weight is what moves you. But in a crowd of 30, your share of the responsibility feels like 1/30th. 1/30th is easy to ignore. 1/30th does not feel like an emergency that requires your specific action. Stanley Milgram, the same researcher famous for his obedience studies, also studied crowd behavior in New York City in the 1960s. He found that the denser the crowd, the more invisible individuals became to each other. People in high-density environments had developed what he called urban overload, a kind of perceptual filter that tuned out most of what was happening around them just to cope with the sheer volume of stimulation. Your brain in a city is constantly performing triage on what deserves your attention. Most of it gets filtered out, including sometimes a person in distress. And here is the part that should unsettle you. You think you would be different. Research consistently shows that people dramatically overestimate how likely they are to help in an emergency. In surveys, more than 90% of people say they would intervene if they saw someone collapse. In controlled experiments, far fewer actually do. The gap between who you think you are and who you actually are in that moment is one of the most reliable findings in social psychology, not because you are a bad person, because your ancient brain is doing something your rational mind has not caught up to yet. Latané and Darley did not just identify the problem, they looked for the antidote. And they found one. It is almost embarrassingly simple. Specificity. When someone is in trouble in a crowd, the worst thing you can do is shout, "Somebody help." That word, somebody, distributes responsibility to everyone and therefore to no one. But the moment you point at a specific person and say, "You in the red jacket, call 911, everything changes. That person can no longer hide inside the crowd. They can no longer look sideways and assume someone else has it handled. The responsibility has been placed precisely on them, and in study after study, they act. This is why emergency training programs now teach people to physically point and assign tasks. You call for help. You clear the space. You apply pressure here. The crowd does not disappear. The bystander effect does not disappear. But it is short-circuited by specificity. You are not asking the group. You are activating an individual. And individuals, it turns out, respond. There is something almost poetic about the solution. What undoes the diffusion of a crowd is the same thing that kept your ancestors safe for 100,000 years. You belong to something small. You are seen. You are known. You are called by name. The bystander effect is often taught as a lesson about human failure, but it is more accurate to say it is a lesson about human design. You are not wired for the crowd. You are wired for the tribe. When you freeze in a sea of strangers, it is not because you stopped caring. It is because your brain is still looking for the small group where your individual action meant something certain. Every time you walk through a crowd today, a train platform, a shopping mall, a busy intersection, that ancient wiring is still running. You are still scanning, still calibrating, still reading other people's faces for information about whether this moment requires you. Most of the time, it does not. But sometimes, it does. And now you know what to do. Do not ask the crowd. Look at one person, say their name, or describe them precisely. Place the responsibility exactly where it can be felt. Because the moment someone feels seen and specifically chosen, they stop being a bystander. They become someone who acts, just like your ancestors did, in a group small enough that every person counted. In a world where no one had the luxury of assuming someone else would handle it. You still live in that world. You have just forgotten it for a moment.